A soft jazz tune filled the air from the rooftop speakers, and the festive atmosphere permeated throughout the space. People raised their glasses, congratulating each other for the efforts and achievements made by individuals within the company. The evening sky turned a warm orange as the sun set, and the lights dimmed as the night took over. This was a moment I had dreamed of for the last 7 years. I'm Amelia, a strategy officer at Stratwell & Co., and tonight was the celebration for my promotion. From a low-level analyst, I had climbed to the position of senior strategy director. It hadn't been easy. Late nights, lost weekends spent buried in financial reports, missed holidays. Every drop of sweat had been worth it to get to this point, standing here while everyone happily congratulated me. I caught the eye of Hannah, my closest friend at the company, who raised her glass high. "Amelia, from analyst to senior strategy director, you've earned it," she said loudly, followed by a round of applause. That feeling was indescribable, a recognition for all the hard work over the years. I smiled, my heart full of joy, but there was something different in the air. I glanced towards Vincent, my boss, the man who had hired me and had once mentored me in the early days at the company. But tonight, his gaze was no longer warm. He gave a brief nod before quickly turning away, not even offering a smile or a word of praise. It was strange, because Vincent had always been the one to encourage me at work, believing in my leadership potential. But recently, he had been distant, cold even. I thought it might just be the pressure from the board, especially after a tough quarter, but there was something else, something that felt off. Suddenly, Vincent's voice rose above the background music, breaking the cheerful atmosphere. "Everyone," he said, his tone unmistakable. A wave of silence fell over the crowd as everyone paused to listen. "I have one last announcement." He stood in the center, tapping his spoon against his glass to get everyone's attention. The room was dead silent. I couldn't anticipate what was coming. Vincent looked at me, a half smile on his lips. "Amelia, you've had your celebration," he began, his voice oozing casual satisfaction as though he was delivering good news. "Now it's time to say goodbye. Your position is no longer available, effective Friday." A stunned silence followed. A few people gasped. My mouth slightly opened, but I didn't speak. I thought I would shout, or at least demand an explanation, and instead I just smiled softly. "It's fine," I said, my voice so calm that I didn't even recognize it myself. "Friday, then," I added, then turned back to the table, picked up my glass, and took one last sip. Vincent seemed taken aback by my response. He looked confused, not at all like the scenario he had prepared for. Maybe he expected me to beg, or at least react strongly, but I didn't give him that satisfaction. The party ended awkwardly. People started leaving, some quietly wishing me good luck, others just disappearing without a word. Vincent vanished too. No one saw him anymore. But I stayed. I stayed until the string lights dimmed and the staff began clearing the tables, because what Vincent didn't know, and what everyone at the party didn't know, was that I had prepared for this moment long ago. A few weeks before, I had accidentally overheard a conversation in the hallway late one night. Vincent thought he was speaking privately, but I was nearby, working in the next room. He was talking about phasing me out, how he would let me enjoy this party before kicking me out. He thought he was being clever, but the truth was, I already knew what was coming. After that evening's party, I returned to the office the following day, walking past rows of desks where colleagues avoided my gaze as though I were something to be discarded. I could feel the difference. The atmosphere in the office seemed to have shifted, even though I was no longer part of it. But I didn't care anymore. I had been preparing for this day for months. That day I sat down at my desk and powered up my computer as usual. Truth be told, I hadn't really been working as I used to for the past 2 months. The time I spent still buried in financial reports, contracts that seemed harmless, had all been building up to something different in my mind. A plan, one crafted with caution and meticulous detail. I wasn't just doing my job anymore. I was doing something Vincent would never have expected. I was keeping track of him. It all began one evening when I was working late, reviewing the budget for our expansion project in Singapore. I stumbled upon something strange, some expenses that didn't add up. The vendors we were working with mostly had no clear information. Their office addresses were unofficial, and there were signs of suspicious activity. But Vincent didn't seem to care. He dismissed it as just tweaking the cost-saving measures. When I questioned him about it, he waved it off, telling me not to worry. That only made me more suspicious. It wasn't like I didn't notice his evasiveness. He always gave short answers, not wanting to clarify anything, as though there was something he didn't want me to understand. That's when I realized this wasn't just negligence. I decided not to press the issue any further. Instead, I quietly started gathering information. Every evening after work, I'd pull out documents, invoices, contracts I thought could be useful. I meticulously tracked every line item in the budget, checked the vendors, reviewed bank transactions that seemed unclear. I went through every contract the company had signed, and I discovered a series of payments to ghost companies. These companies had no legitimate activity, and one of them was registered at a frozen yogurt shop in Montana. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Large sums of money were being funneled through these suppliers without legitimate cause. We were being scammed, and Vincent was behind it all. He was using the company as a front to siphon money out. While I couldn't directly prove everything, I had enough evidence to know that this could not continue. So I turned to a lawyer, Teresa, whom I'd met during a business ethics seminar. Teresa was a corporate whistleblower attorney, and she guided me on how to handle the situation. She advised, keep everything confidential. Don't act until you have all your evidence. I followed her advice. I carefully documented every piece of information I had collected over the past 2 months. Every transaction, every invoice, every piece of information was noted, time-stamped, and stored on a separate hard drive. I even backed everything up on the cloud to ensure no one could erase these crucial pieces of evidence. But I didn't stop there. I knew that if I didn't act quickly, everything I had done would be useless. So I prepared a detailed report, one that I would send to the board of directors. And I didn't just make a regular report. I made sure that everything was time-stamped correctly so that no one could deny or alter the facts. But I wasn't in a hurry. I didn't want to act too soon. I wanted everything to be perfect. Only when I was sure that Vincent couldn't escape what he had done would I proceed to the next step. And I decided I wouldn't let him walk away without facing the consequences. All I needed to do now was wait for the right moment. On Thursday morning, as I stepped into the office, I immediately felt the change in the atmosphere. Everyone was silent, avoiding eye contact with me, as if they feared being caught up in an impending disaster. But I didn't care. I had been preparing for this day. Tomorrow would be Friday, the day Vincent had chosen to fire me, as part of the restructuring plan he had devised. But I wasn't going to be the one left behind. I had planned to counter this attack, to strike back in a way Vincent could never imagine. I wouldn't just respond to the injustice, I would make everything he had done undeniable, crystal clear. For the past 2 months, I had been working in the shadows, collecting every piece of evidence that Vincent thought would never be uncovered. Every invoice I found, every suspicious transaction I tracked, I meticulously recorded. But these documents were just a part of the plan. To truly make Vincent pay, I needed to do something bigger. A powerful move that would make it impossible to deny. I called Teresa, the lawyer I had consulted before. She was an expert in corporate whistleblowing and had worked on similar cases in the past. After I told her everything, Teresa didn't hesitate to advise me to prepare 3 copies of the documents, one to be stored in the cloud, one printed and sealed carefully, and another to be kept in a USB drive that I would always carry with me. This would ensure that no one could destroy the crucial evidence if I were no longer at the company. My plan was simple. I would send an anonymous report to the board of directors on the day Vincent thought I'd be fired, the very day he believed he had won. I wouldn't just leave a short message, I would make sure they couldn't ignore the truth. I would do everything quietly, cautiously, so no one could ever guess that I had prepared this meticulously. That afternoon, I spent my time drafting an email. I didn't write it using the company email. Instead, I used an anonymous email account I'd created earlier. Every detail I sent was protected with all the necessary documents attached. This email wasn't just an ordinary report, it was a bomb, containing all the details Vincent thought would be hidden forever. After I sent it, I felt a sense of relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I couldn't stop worrying. I knew that with just one click, everything had changed. But what I didn't know was whether Vincent would be able to trace it back to me. I had to be prepared for anything. By the end of Thursday, I sat at my desk, preparing everything I would need for tomorrow. I printed out a copy of the report and carefully sealed it in an envelope, ready to send it to the board. I didn't know how long it would take for them to discover the truth, but one thing I was certain of was that I had done everything I could to make sure they couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, not to prepare for work, but to finish what was left. The feeling in me was completely different from the exhausting workdays I'd known before. I wasn't a subordinate anymore, but the one in control of everything. As I entered the boardroom to receive the announcement from Vincent, I knew that no matter what he thought, no matter how much he believed he had won, it would only be a hollow victory. I wasn't the type to leave quietly. The next morning, as I walked into the office, the atmosphere had clearly shifted. My colleagues no longer avoided eye contact as they had before. Instead, they looked at me as though I were an alien. A heavy silence enveloped the space. They all knew what was happening. And although they didn't say anything, I could feel the tension in every glance. Vincent had disappeared all morning. I didn't see him in the office, nor was he present in any meetings. These signs couldn't be clearer. I knew the company's system was in turmoil, and the price Vincent would pay wouldn't be small. The board of directors had received the report I sent the night before. My letter didn't just contain documents about shady transactions, but also clear evidence of Vincent's wrongdoings. I was sure they couldn't ignore it, because this wasn't just idle talk. It was numbers, invoices, and financial links that they couldn't deny. When I received the notification from HR about my exit interview, I knew it wouldn't be a typical meeting anymore. Instead, I was called into an unscheduled session with the presence of a board counsel, something I hadn't expected. As I walked into the meeting room, I immediately noticed the difference. The tension in the air was palpable, almost tangible. Denise from HR sat at one corner of the table, looking anxious but hiding it well. Beside her was a tall man dressed in a gray suit. He didn't look at me, only focusing on the documents in front of him. I guessed he was a lawyer, and his presence wasn't by chance. "Amelia, thank you for coming," Denise spoke, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. It was all business now. "We need to clarify a few things surrounding your termination decision." I said nothing, sitting down and waiting. I had been preparing for this moment for a long time. My calmness was my strongest weapon now. The lawyer looked up, his gaze sharp, treating me like a subject to be handled. "Amelia, I'm James Price, legal counsel for the board. We would like you to clarify some of the information in the report you sent. Could you elaborate on the transactions you pointed out?" His tone was cold, but I remained unshaken. I knew I was in a stronger position than they were. "I've outlined everything clearly in the report," I replied calmly. "All the transactions I discovered showed signs of fraud, carried out through obscure suppliers, and there were unreasonable expenses in the company's projects." James raised an eyebrow but didn't contradict me. Instead, he opened a folder and stared at it intently. "We've reviewed the information you provided. Some of the issues are indeed serious. However, we would also like to hear from you about the specific situations you mentioned." I didn't miss the opportunity. I'm just a part of the system. I can't see the whole picture. But what I can clearly see is financial misappropriation, money being funneled through shell companies, and the manipulation of financial data for personal gain. I've checked thoroughly, and I couldn't let this go on. The atmosphere in the room grew more tense. Denise didn't dare look at me, while James nodded thoughtfully, but I knew they didn't fail to understand the issue. They were trying to cover up what couldn't be saved. "We will continue investigating these issues," James said, but there was no surprise in his voice. "However, I want you to know that what you've done might have consequences for you in the future." I smiled slightly, undisturbed. "I've prepared for all of this, and if anyone is going to face consequences, it's Vincent." As those words left my lips, I felt a strange sense of release. Everything had been laid on the table. Now all I had to do was wait and see what would happen next. Right after the meeting, the atmosphere in the office became even more tense. Information about Vincent being denied access to the company's financial system spread quickly. Lawyers arrived to investigate Vincent's financial documents, but I knew this was just the first step. I had successfully set in motion a machine that no one could stop. And Vincent, who had always thought he could manipulate everything, would now have to face the consequences of what he had created. After my report was received by the board, the silence in the company became more unbearable and tense than ever. Rumors about the internal investigation spread like wildfire, and every gaze seemed to be fixed on Vincent. His actions not only harmed the company, but also made me the one who had to stand up and confront him. But I have no regrets. 3 days after the meeting with the board, I received an official notice from HR. I would not be leaving, and instead, I was recognized as a whistleblower under federal whistleblower protection laws. This was something I hadn't expected, but it marked a significant turning point in this story. Vincent was suspended from accessing the company accounts and the financial projects he controlled. That night, an emergency board meeting was held. Important decisions were made. Vincent, who had been the first person to hire me into the company, was now fired for financial misappropriation. He was forced to leave quietly, with no apologies or well wishes from the company. No one was defending him anymore. The next morning, I received an email from CEO Peter Thompson. The email wasn't long, but it was enough to make me feel that a significant change was underway. In the email, Peter thanked me for my courage and determination to protect the company's ethics, and also informed me that the board had decided to implement a major overhaul of the company's ethical and financial policies. They would focus on rebuilding the company culture, starting with creating stricter financial auditing processes to ensure that fraudulent activities like Vincent's would never happen again. The company also publicly thanked me in an official announcement sent to all employees. I couldn't believe the words I was reading, because all I had ever done was stand up for what was right. I never thought I'd be honored within this company, but this was what I deserved after everything I had gone through. That weekend, I received a call from Hannah. She wasn't just my best friend. She had witnessed my transformation throughout this process. She could hardly believe the changes that were happening. "Amelia, you really did it. I can't believe Vincent got fired, and the company publicly thanked you like that," Hannah said, her voice full of amazement. "I can't believe it either," I replied, my voice calm, but deep inside, I felt a sense of relief. But that's what I did, and I don't regret it. This story didn't just end with me exposing one person. It was a fight for justice, for protecting honesty in the workplace, and for standing up when I saw something wrong. And now things were not just changing for me, but for the entire company. When I walked into the office on Monday morning, I noticed that the atmosphere had shifted. My colleagues who had always avoided me before now seemed friendlier. They started to open up, greeting me sincerely, no longer with the hesitation they had before. I knew they weren't bad people, but they had been oppressed by a system hidden behind a leader like Vincent. Now they could finally breathe a sigh of relief because what had happened would empower them in their work. But what pleased me the most was the change I saw within myself. I was no longer the naive girl afraid of being cast aside. I no longer had to bow my head in a company where only power and money had a voice. I had proven that sometimes silence isn't strength, it's fear. And when you know how to stand up, even alone, you can change everything. That day, while I was sitting at my desk, Peter called me into his office. I entered with a calm demeanor, although deep inside I was a bit nervous about what might come next. Amelia, I want you to know that we won't just be overhauling the company financially. We also want you to help in rebuilding the company's ethical policies. We need people like you, people who dare to stand up for what's right, Peter told me, his gaze full of respect. I couldn't believe my ears. From being the employee who was pushed aside, I had become someone with a voice in the company. This wasn't just a change in my job, it was the recognition of my own worth. I'll do whatever's necessary, I replied without hesitation. For this company and for the people around me. My story isn't one that ends with a great victory, but rather with a new beginning. Everything isn't finished yet, but I've seen the light at the end of the tunnel. And most importantly, I've not only protected the company, but I've also protected myself. Just 1 week after Vincent was fired, I began receiving messages from former colleagues, many of whom had never paid much attention to me before. Some thanked me, others expressed respect and admiration for what I had done. They felt as if they had been freed from an invisible burden, though not everyone had the courage to stand up as I did. But the most memorable moment came on Tuesday morning when I received a call from a company called Alira Partners, a leading strategic consulting firm renowned for its leadership programs for women. They had heard about me from one of Stratwell's board members who had informed them of the changes in the company and encouraged them to reach out to me. Alira Partners wanted me to join as a partner, offering a new opportunity for my career. Immediately, I felt a fresh breeze blow through. I was no longer an employee being manipulated or a tool in someone else's hands. Now, I was the one in control of my life, the one who could create change, the one who could decide the path I would take. When I met the team at Alira Partners, I instantly sensed the difference. They weren't just offering me a job, they were offering me a real opportunity to grow and lead. They didn't just look at my abilities, they respected the truth and what I had done. They wanted me to work on leadership strategies, helping other women rise and succeed in their careers, just as I had. A week later, I received an invitation to speak at the Global Women Leadership Conference in New York City. This was a major event bringing together female leaders, entrepreneurs, and top experts in the industry. And I, Amelia, someone who only a few months ago had been pushed out of a company, was now standing in front of the opportunity to share my story with hundreds of people. When I stepped onto the stage, I felt an odd sense of peace, as if everything had led to this moment. I was no longer the girl afraid of being rejected or disregarded. I was the woman standing before an audience, ready to share my story so they could understand that change begins with ourselves. I began sharing my journey from being dismissed, taken advantage of, to reclaiming my self-worth and standing up for what I deserved. I spoke about Vincent, about the months I spent under manipulation and the silent strategies I had to adopt in order to face the betrayal at work. I spoke about determination, about how I sought fairness, not just for myself, but for all the others who were silently suffering in the workplace. We don't need others to define our value, I told the audience, my tone resolute. Respect and success aren't things someone can bestow upon you. They are things we create for ourselves. And if you don't stand up for yourself, you will always be a victim of an unjust system. Those words didn't just echo in the hall, they resonated in the hearts of everyone present. After my speech, many people came up to thank me, saying they had found the strength to stand up in their own workplaces. A woman named Erica, who had sent me a message the previous week, approached and hugged me tightly. Thank you, you've made me realize that I'm not alone. I will start standing up too and not let anyone impose on me anymore, she said, her eyes teary. I felt that I hadn't just shared my story, but also given them the strength to change their own lives. After the conference, Alira Partners contacted me to announce that they would be launching a new program specifically for female leaders, and I would be leading that program. This was an opportunity not only for me to grow my personal career, but also to contribute to change in the community, where other women could find their strength and potential. This feeling was amazing, not because I had achieved success, but because I had realized I deserved it. I hadn't just protected myself, I had paved the way for others, those who had been overlooked and disregarded, to stand up and find strength in themselves. The following weekend, as I stood in front of the mirror in my new office, I looked into my own eyes and smiled. From an anonymous employee, I had become a leader, someone with a voice. And the most important thing, I had come to understand that sometimes the greatest victory is not when we defeat our enemies, but when we find ourselves and help others do the same. The first month at Alira Partners passed quickly, marked by significant changes. Not only was I rebuilding my life, but I also saw clear progress in my work, where I was truly empowered, no longer a tool in someone else's hands. I wasn't just working to earn a living, I was actually leading, guiding, and creating leadership programs for women. But there was one thing I still couldn't let go of: my old company, Stratwell. Despite having an excellent job at Alira, a part of me still felt the need to finish what I had started at Stratwell. That company wasn't just where I spent 7 years of my youth, it was also where I had witnessed ruthlessness, manipulation, and injustice. If I didn't do something about it, I wouldn't feel truly victorious. One morning, as I was working in my new office, I received a call from Peter Thompson, the former CEO of Stratwell. His voice sounded more serious than ever. "Amelia, I hope you have time to talk. I understand you have reasons for keeping your distance, but we really want to find a way to make amends. The company has changed, and we want to invite you back to help us rebuild." Peter's words made me think. His offer could be a chance for me to truly change the company from within. But I knew that if I returned, I wouldn't accept just going back to work as I had before. If I came back, there would be clear and strict conditions. "I'll come back, but only if you genuinely commit to reform and recognize the people who have been overlooked all this time," I responded without hesitation. "The company needs to admit its mistakes and create a fair working environment where everyone can fully develop their potential without fear of being abandoned." Peter was silent for a moment, then I heard agreement in his voice. "I understand. We will do it your way. We will change." Honestly, this wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear from a CEO I once respected, but I understood what I had gone through wasn't just my story. It was a lesson for those who had been oppressed, manipulated, and dismissed. Without real change, I wouldn't return. A month later, I returned to Stratwell, but not as an employee as before. I was given the role of leading a new department responsible for ethics policies and financial oversight. I wasn't just helping steer the company back on track. I was also involved in rebuilding the company's cultural foundation. The company started conducting ethics training for all employees, and strict financial audits were established. However, the most important thing was that I gave people like me, those who had been overlooked and forgotten for so long, the opportunity to stand up and grow. I couldn't change the past, but I could help them change the future. A year later, as I sat in my new office at Stratwell, looking out the window with the late afternoon light casting a golden glow over the city, I felt an odd sense of peace. I hadn't just overcome difficulties and challenges. I had done what I always wanted: change a system, create a workspace where people could truly grow without fear of being overshadowed or exploited. My story wasn't one about revenge. Yes, I proved that people like Vincent couldn't keep manipulating and deceiving others. But what I was seeking wasn't revenge. It was recognition. I wanted everyone to understand that standing up for yourself wasn't rebellion. It was a necessary action to protect your self-worth and push back against wrongdoings. True victory doesn't come from tearing others down, but from finding yourself, standing firm, and creating an environment where fairness and respect are the foundation. Looking back on my journey, I didn't feel victorious because I defeated someone. I felt victorious because I made a difference. And that was the greatest victory of all. Amelia's story is a powerful testament to the strength of resilience and the determination to stand up for what's right. Despite facing betrayal and manipulation in her career, she not only triumphed, but also created a significant shift in her work environment, helping others rediscover their own self-worth. Her journey reminds us that true victory doesn't come from revenge, but from recognition and the ability to change what is wrong for ourselves and for others. What do you think about Amelia's journey? Would you take action like she did if you found yourself in a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss out on more inspiring stories about life and family.